Normally this is where we would throw it to David for a drum intro, but without that, I'm going to do drums myself and welcome Steve Dennis. Steve, thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. All right. It's remarkable retail. So
you're doing a good job with the getting the cover on the camera.
I know.
I appreciate
Look at that.
Yeah.
I love it. And we've got to have the completely updated right there. We were talking about it before you came on about how university professors will come out with a new edition like every semester and be like, oh, it's $400.
Right.
No, the last version didn't count. But you actually, they may change like a word or two, but you really dove in, added quite a bit extra for the post-COVID economy.
Yeah, it was, I guess, unfortunate timing in some respects that the first edition was written and completed about 3 months before COVID came out, and then came out about 2 months after COVID had started. So, spoiler alert, a lot changed. So, yeah, I felt, most of the ideas are fundamentally the same, but there was a lot of updating and expanding to really kind of deal with some of the things that transpired and I think are going to be important going forward.
So, why don't we start by defining retail? Because there used to be a very clear division between e-commerce and brick and mortar retail, but that's starting to change. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I think if you go back 25 years, retail was like 97% done in a physical store. In other words, you went to the store, picked stuff out, for the most part took it home with you, and then like 2 or 3% was mail order catalog. And then this little company out of Seattle called Amazon came along, other folks started to get their business online, and things really started to change. So I think we've seen a lot of growth in pure play online where there isn't a physical component. But really now today, there's very few companies that don't have both a digital and physical presence. I always say digital drives physical and vice versa. So to me, it's for the most part, it's all just commerce, and you really have to embrace the blur and figure out the best way to take care of the customer in the way they want to be taken care of.
So you, in leading up to this interview, we exchanged some emails, and you brought up a interesting topic, the hybridization of retail and the rapidly evolving role of the store. So tell us about that.
Well, I've been noticing this for a while back when, I worked years and years ago at Sears in the early days of e-commerce, and even way back then we saw people going to our website to research, to then go to the store and buy. Later on, when I was at Neiman Marcus, same kind of phenomenon. We just saw that digital and physical were blurring, and that the shopping experience was becoming more and more hybrid in nature. In other words, physical and digital are involved in the whole thing. I think COVID really took this to a whole new level. The particular thing that I get into in the book is how the role of stores have changed. Like I mentioned, for the most part, people have been building stores for the last 200 years, basically as places to go, see stuff, pick it up, and take it home with you. Well, one of the things we saw during COVID, which I'm sure everybody will remember, is suddenly we had curbside pickup. We had buy online, pick up in store. A lot of retailers are fulfilling e-commerce orders from their store, whether that's home delivery or shipping it through post. So this is a big change in consumer behavior, but I think we're really going to see a lot of changes that have to happen at store level to accommodate this. We're already seeing it, but I think a lot of investment's going to have to go to really deal with those changes.
So that's the key word there, investment. So because obviously with a online retailer, it's not cheap to redo a website, but I gotta imagine it's a lot cheaper to pay to change a website, change a couple pages, than it is to, if you've got a big chain, to adapt the store to this new hybrid model. But at the same time, if they don't, then they're just going to keep losing ground. And so how do they build a financial case to say, like, we got to do this now?
Well, it can be tough. This has been an issue, back when omni-channel started to become a thing, which is not my favorite term, but there was this whole move to get traditional retailers, I guess you could call them, online, but also to try to create this integration. And one of the big struggles was you could spend a lot of money on technology and just be moving sales from the store to online. It's not necessarily incremental, but I think for the most part you had to do it to stay competitive. And I think we're a little bit in the same place. Like, it's hard to imagine not offering customers the ability to buy online and pick up in store, or return items to store. So I think it's become table stakes for a lot of companies. So it's not easy. The key, I think, is to figure out how to use it to your advantage to gain market share, which we've seen a lot of retailers be able to do, and a lot that are just kind of playing catch up.
So you've had more than one kind of quote that's caught fire, gone viral. One is physical retail isn't dead, boring retail is.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a couple things. One is there's been this, as I'm sure most people know, there's been this idea of a retail apocalypse that's been talked about for years. And unfortunately, the facts just don't line up with that story. Physical retail has grown each of the last 11 years. There are thousands of stores being open. Some of the most successful retailers on the planet, whether you want to talk about Dollar Store or Apple or Costco, or you can go through a big list, are primarily brick and mortar retailers, and they're investing in retail. So it's just clearly not true that physical retail is going away. What is true is obviously e-commerce has been growing faster than physical retail in total. But if you actually look at the retailers that are closing stores, and in some cases going bankrupt, it's really these retailers that have not transitioned to this new world, but who are stuck in what I call the boring or unremarkable middle. What's happened with retail over the last probably 2 decades is success has been found at one end, largely these kind of value, assortment, convenience-driven retailers, Amazon, Walmart, et cetera, or more on the higher end, luxury or specialty retailers like Williams-Sonoma, Restoration Hardware. But these companies and department stores are kind of the poster child for this, that aren't super convenient, they don't have the lowest prices, but they also don't offer anything special in terms of service or unique product. They're the ones that have really been struggling. So that's where you see most of the store closings and most of the bankruptcies, is that unremarkable middle.
So unremarkable middle. The book is Remarkable Retail. So in the book, you outline 8 essentials to remarkable retail. If you want to see all 8, you got to get the book. Where can they get the book, by the way? Amazon?
Just about anywhere. Anywhere books are sold. Yep. Yep.
Any fine retailer where books are sold. Let's talk about a couple of them.
Yep.
We don't have time for all 8, but human-centered.
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, just step back for a second. One of the things I tried to do with these 8 essentials was based upon my work as an executive and working with clients and kind of studying things. I saw a lot of common patterns in terms of what the most successful retailers were doing. So I tried to boil that down into the 8 essentials. Human-centered is kind of my take on customer centricity. Most customer-centric initiatives haven't seemed to pan out very well, so I wanted to kind of look at that in a different way. And I think one of the things that I noticed is with the obsession with the customer, which is great, we're often not thinking holistically enough about the other folks that are involved in the whole process. Your store associates, community, vendors, so I'm trying to just kind of open the aperture, so to speak, on that. But the other piece, which I think is particularly important if you get away from kind of that value orientation, but more kind of the higher end, more experiential sort of retail, is to try to bring empathy to the equation. There's a lot of products that people don't buy just because they're a perfect spec. We buy them because of how it makes us feel, or the story we can tell to other people about us, particularly on the higher end. So I think to do that, you have to really be able to be empathetic and understand things more than just kind of a logical way of spending. So that was kind of what I was trying to bring to that idea, or to that essential.
Now, any examples come to mind of like a retailer that's done a good job of that, becoming more
Well, to
human-centered?
pick one that's for folks in Dallas, Restoration Hardware just opened this big store on Knox, right? The store's full with things nobody needs, right? I mean, but the people that have the money, that like that sort of stuff, that want to be kind of part of that club, love going there. Productivity is amazing. They've opened a lot of these stores. They're starting to go to Europe. And so that's a brand that's not just about the thing that sits the best or the best sort of bang for the buck. It's a lot about that emotional content and the story that we want to tell about ourselves and to others.
It makes me think of another REV's guest, the Citizenry, who we've had before. They're in retail now, and all their products obviously tell a story. We're drinking out of the Citizenry mugs right now. Another of the 8 is radical.
Yeah, last one, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, so radical, the fundamental idea is to think about risk in a different way. I've worked with some big retailers directly as well as clients, and I think there's fundamentally a misperception of risk. With things changing so quickly, even I'm talking pre-COVID, but we've seen this incredible disruption over the last 20 years, and a lot of retailers that have been around for a while took kind of a wait and see attitude. They thought it was really risky to experiment more aggressively or to open stores or formats that might compete with themselves. And they got it totally wrong. The riskiest thing was to not change, right? And then many are finding that years later, they can't even play catch up. Like they're so far behind that they'll never play catch up. So one is just to understand that actually the opposite is risky, that you have to take more risk fundamentally. You have to try a lot of stuff. So radical is about, number one, embracing maybe more radical ideas, unconventional thinking, but it's really about building this culture of experimentation. And one of the things I think people get wrong, actually, well, we've got a small audience here, but we can do it for the virtual audience. How many people have a Fire phone, Amazon Fire phone? Probably nobody, right?
Yeah.
So Amazon launched that Fire phone 6-7 years ago, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it, and it was pretty much a failure. Now they did learn some things that they applied to Alexa, and so it wasn't a total write-off. But the thing that a lot of people miss about Amazon is they try a huge amount of stuff. And some of it is taking a lot of swings at bat, to use the cliche, but some of it is how they fail fast and they apply those learnings to the next thing and to the next thing. So they're making a big push into grocery stores. A lot of that work came out of some other experiments they've been doing over the last few years. So being a radical, finding the unconventional thinking, but just constantly pushing to try stuff, move on, and go on to the next thing.
That's an interesting example. I remember a long time ago. Do you remember the ESPN phone?
Yeah.
I thought people. But so with retail, experimentation, like Amazon was kind of all or nothing.
Yeah.
Like we got to do this phone. You can't like try it out in one little region. The Amazon phone. They went big and it didn't work. With retail, are there other ways that they can experiment without making a huge
Sure. I mean,
jump?
well, first of all, if it's something that you can do on a website, right, that's a lot easier. A/B testing is probably the most mundane example of that. But there are things you can do with small segments on a website. There are things you can do, pick a few stores, try it out in a small section of the store. Certainly, if in a more physical world, people are trying different, smaller concepts, not just Amazon, but plenty of others. So I think you always have to go into kind of the risk return. What if I'm wrong? I mean, I want to make it sound too easy, but what are you trying to learn? How do you learn it quickly? And what happens if you're wrong? What happens if you're right? And it's really the cycle time. I think that's the most important thing. So it's going to depend on the particular retailer, whether it's more of a web thing or a store format thing or a product that you try in a few stores.
So the book is Remarkable Retail. If you haven't already, put in the comments your questions. So I'm gonna get to the questions in a second. But before we move to those, you are obviously executive in a lot of Fortune 500 companies, most recently Neiman Marcus. Is the book written only for executives of big multinational corporations, or is it something that somebody that maybe only has one location can get value from?
Well, I like to think it applies to anybody. I've been asked this question a few times, and I do certainly use a lot of familiar examples. So generally speaking, those are going to be big companies. But one of the things that I think is difficult is a lot of the bigger companies, they have a hard time implementing things, right? And so I actually think some smaller retailers might have a better chance of actually applying the principles because they're not necessarily as bureaucratic. If it's an owner, it's their money or their family's money or a couple partners making that decision as opposed to going through the bureaucracy that unfortunately is true in a lot of companies that need to change the most. So I think the principles are pretty core retail principles that are working today and hopefully will work in the future.
Got it. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if something can be applied across hundreds of stores, then the concept is probably pretty bulletproof. So a small retailer could take anything from there and apply it, but then likewise, they've got a little more room to maneuver.
Yeah, I mean, one difference that's probably worth pointing out is, it's certainly harder for smaller retailers to do the same kinds of things that big retailers can do with technology. I mean, it's got easier with things like Shopify, and there are things, Square, there are things that small retailers can deploy that kind of even them up. But certainly some of the massive technology investments, it's hard for smaller retailers to get around that. So that's the one place where maybe it's not quite as helpful, but I think most of the principles apply pretty well.
Got it. All right. let's go to, yeah, thank you, Steve. Oh, wait.